everyone. Welcome to another week of ProMAX Tech Talks. I got my tech team here, Brian, Mike, and Taylor. And this week we're going to be talking about video editing computers and what you need to make one of those happen. So guys, let's get started. What is the best computer for video editing available on the market currently? Mike, do you want to kick that off?
It's kind of a tough one because this goes into Brian's workflow questions all the time here. I'm an in-between user because I use both Mac and a PC. So it really depends on your workflow here and how much budget you got to spend on a machine in a sense. And also what kind of programs are you going to be using as well. Because, Mac users, they can use anything from Final Cut, Resolve to like Premiere, but Premiere, you can also use that on PC as well. So it really depends on what you're going to be using it for. I don't know if we want to elaborate any more of that or narrow it down further than that.
I mean, if you want just the biggest number, the new iMac Pro, or no, the new Mac Pro Tower. Yeah. The thing that's like 50 grand. That's probably the best, just from a
if
sheer
you have
horsepower perspective.
No limitation on budget, and you want to go Mac Pro.
Go for it.
Yeah.
To Mike's point, it depends on your workflow. I mean, a lot of people can make use with a good solid, MacBook Pro laptop or a high-end PC laptop. Or if you got to get into desktops, it also depends on, what support equipment do you need? Do you need a color correction quality monitor? Do you need a bunch of other stuff? That's going to dictate, how many PCI slots you need, how much RAM you need, what kind of GPU power you need. And it's a pretty wild range. Like you can very easily go from, kind of the $2,000 range, which is probably about as low as you're rationally going to get, up to, a small BMW in the size of a Mac Pro Tower.
So what is it that's like under the hood that makes the big differences between those workstations? Like what separates the super high-end Mac from the low end? Like what internal parts make that big leap?
You're mostly talking about just the scaling of the basic components, right? So you're talking about more RAM, bigger GPUs, more processor cores, more processors. There is some other stuff there, special video decode cards, things like that are a little more targeted depending on exactly what you're doing. And then you've got the storage side of it too. You're generally one of the big differences between most video editing systems includes, local storage. Is there attached storage? What kind of storage can you connect to it? Thunderbolt, SAS, just different connectivity options. So it's mostly a question of scale. Like I said, if you're looking at a desktop, you can actually start at kind of like a high-end gaming machine is kind of a good entry point. Like if generally, a high-end gaming machine is pretty much all you need to get started minus the storage. Usually those don't have a ridiculous amount of storage associated with them. If you go from there, then you're talking about adding multiple GPUs, more processors, things like that. And you're just scaling up from there into, however many zeros you're comfortable writing on that check.
Gotcha. Okay. So essentially you're paying for more. More is going to get you everything. Okay, so into the next question, what separates a workstation for video editing from like a basic home computer that you just do like your basic emails and surfing the internet on? What's the difference between those two?
Taylor?
The main difference is going to be, the number of PCI slots available on the motherboard, the quality of the GPU, the quality of the processor, the amount of RAM. So your clock speed, the core counts of those processors, and general, performance scalability of your starting parts, which is going to be your CPU, your RAM, your motherboard, and your graphics card. And from there, it's however much you want to put in it.
Okay. For people who might not be too familiar with some of this technology, do you want to break down, like, kind of in layman's terms, what like PCI cards and all that kind of stuff is?
Okay. How low level are we talking? Because that's okay. So basically, depending on what you're doing with your video editing machine, you could need something like a SDI, video in, video out card for doing color correction and accuracy. So you're talking, one slot for that. If you're doing a video card, you need another slot for that. If you're doing 10 gig, you need another slot for that. If you're talking SAS connection, Thunderbolt connection, those potentially need another PCI card. So not every motherboard has that many slots available. So you're going to need a higher quality, more expensive motherboard to fit all of those cards into the system in the first place. From there, you need a bigger processor with more lanes, which basically lets you divide up all the resources needed for those cards. So the processor has to be big enough with enough cores and enough lanes to support that as well. So you're talking bigger motherboard, bigger processor, more RAM, more cards. All of this stuff increases the cost of the system overall. So that's where that all comes into play.
Yeah.
Brian, something to say?
Yeah, expansion capabilities are really interesting kind of bottleneck in this whole thing, because you can really shoot yourself in the foot if you're intending to build a high-end editing system on a platform that doesn't really support the appropriate amount of expansion that you're going to need. And what I mean by that is, like, if you get a motherboard that only has a couple of PCI slots, you'll find real quick that once you add a video card, if you get a certain kind of motherboard, once you add a video card, you may actually cover both PCI slots with a single card. So you're basically done at that point. It's funny because, you know, you look at the Mac Pro trash cans that existed for the last decade, right? One of their biggest problems that everybody had with them was the expansion ability. Like, you could not just open that up and drop in 2 new video cards. They only updated the video cards, you know, that were custom built for those systems, I think, a couple of times during their entire lifetime. I mean, Thunderbolt was technically designed to handle that, but it has its own limitations that, frankly, a lot of these devices have surpassed. You know, you can get storage arrays that will top out Thunderbolt connections on those Mac Pro trash cans. So it's interesting. The new Mac Pro Tower in particular was built, really the design switched back to kind of the old, I use these loving names, right? The old cheese grater kind of design. You know, it's back to like a kind of a mid-sized tower or full-size tower type design, because of that expansion ability, because you don't know when the next product comes out where you're going to need to drop in, you know, your Red Rocket or they have a ProRes decode card. I think, I don't remember what they call it, like Afterburner or something like that, that they've got that you can drop in there now. But those are things that you can't do if you don't have the slots to do it. And in a lot of cases, because of the throughput that video requires, you can't always reliably do it on a Thunderbolt connection. And on top of that, adding critical components via Thunderbolt is always a touchy thing, because the connector's it's not a positive connection connector. It can fall out. It's kind of weird. And you've got expansion boxes all over your desk. It's just messy and annoying. And you're also spending additional money buying like PCI chassis and things like that. Now you need another power strip, and it just gets tiresome.
All reasons I hate Thunderbolt.
Giant dongle life.
Yeah, right. Yeah, so yeah, the expansion side of it is an important consideration, and you've got to start it. That is really probably the most key thing if you're going to look at designing or building or buying a workstation that's going to become a video editing system, is getting one that supports, you know, a reasonable amount of PCI expansion for those extra cards, and RAM, and you know, just general connectivity. How many USB 3 ports do you have? Do you have any Thunderbolt ports on the board? Stuff like that. That is really where this begins, is choosing that motherboard that supports that.
Cool. So that actually segues perfectly into the next question. Well, there's 2 questions. One, if someone's going to buy a video editing computer or build one for themselves, how much money should they be expecting to put out to get something that can perform for them? Mike, I know you built a workstation not too long ago. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I built an i9 1151 9900K with the Design Airboard, Z390 specifically for editing. That was roughly about like $2,300 on the low. It can get up to like $3,000 depending on extra components here and there, especially with water cooling and everything too, just to keep that i9 cool, because that thing is just stupid hot for what it can do. It has a lot of onboard, so you can have Thunderbolt on there. Unfortunately, it doesn't have 10 gig like I think the X399 does, and a couple of the other ones. I'm not sure, but it has most of the components that you need with the motherboard, other than a traditional video card and whatnot. So.
Okay. And then how much would something of comparable performance cost to go buy from like a Micro Center or Best Buy or one of those type stores?
That pretty much came from Micro Center, actually. All
Okay,
the so I buy from just
Well,
shelf.
You're
Mine
talking
is
about a
directly from like a
pre-built unit,
manufacturer
right?
or something like that.
You're talking like a pre-built Dell system or like an
Buying
HP.
it from Dell,
Got
Lenovo,
it. Got it.
Asus, Mac, one of those companies.
I'm not sure how much like pre-built Dells and stuff cost anymore. I haven't really looked
In
into those.
in the range of what you built, like you're looking at like the 32 to 3500 range, kinda.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's usually a premium of around $1,000 to $1,500 in the range that you're talking. I mean, obviously, if you're talking about building a $6,000 system, if the parts are $6,000, you're probably looking at close to a $10,000 computer. From a out of the box kind of perspective. Um, if you're just buying parts, then there's obviously a lot more that goes into it, a lot more knowledge and time that goes into it than just throwing the parts together. Luckily, Mike has the resources of ProMAX to kind of use to play and build his stuff. So he might have a little advantage over most folks doing their own stuff. But there's a lot to consider. And look, if you're a video editor first and you're not a hobbyist when it comes to being a PC enthusiast, $1,000 worth of your time is probably not a lot.
Fair enough.
And that premium comes with the benefit of, you have a company like Dell or HP to reference for support, documentation, all of this stuff about their workstations that you really won't have if you're buying the individual parts and building it yourself. Like, you'll just have to know what's going on whenever something goes wrong. You won't just be able to call up a support line and be like, hey, I'm having this happen and what do I do? It's like, you're going to have to dig on the internet. You're going to have to look up forums. You're going to have to figure out drivers, parts, issues. Like, there's so many things that go into it when you're building your own system that you just got to be ready for. I mean, How many times did you have to swap your cooling system, Mike?
Well, remember, I'm on different chassis, so
Yeah.
that's
Also different chassis.
Yeah.
That's awesome. All right, guys. And to wrap it up, the last question for today. What are the main components you need for a video editing computer? We kind of talked about this earlier, like what those parts that separate a regular PC from a video editing computer. What are those, and can you give a brief description of what they do for your computer? Brian, do you want to tackle this one?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first and foremost is there's two really that will change the game for video editors, and that is you need a high-end GPU solution and you need high-end storage. You need to be able to feed the computer, the media that you're sending it and store, potentially terabytes of data, in a way that's easy to do. And then you need the GPU is the most effective way to scale performance on most of these machines these days. You can, if you're topping out because of if you're doing 5K, 6K, 8K kind of stuff, obviously, higher end processors, multiple processors, things like that start to make more sense, or start to make as much sense as going with a high end GPU. But with most systems that you're going to find, especially if you're doing something off the shelf or building it yourself and you're not like a real PC build enthusiast, a GPU is the easiest thing to scale and get real performance out of. Like, the difference between buying a cheap GPU and an expensive GPU is literally, well, let me rephrase it. The difference between buying a low performance GPU and a very high performance GPU, in most circumstances, is literally just money. Like, the actual component that you drop in, aside from the power requirement, that's really the only thing that's going to prevent you from putting a really nice high-end GPU into a fairly low-end system. And you'll get a lot of benefit out of that. Now you might start bottlenecking, again, at the CPU, and you have a whole different thing. But yeah, GPU and storage. are going to be the two biggest things, because those are usually storage in particular in most workstations these days is here's your OS drive. Maybe there's a hard drive, a terabyte hard drive or 2 terabyte hard drive in there to store extra stuff on, but none of it is particularly fast by design. And certainly none of it is more than a couple terabytes at the most, when you get it off the shelf.
Well,
Awesome. Mike,
the
Taylor?
type of GPU also matters too, doesn't it?
Sorry?
The type of GPU also matters as well, doesn't it? Did we do a test between GeForce versus Quadros?
Yeah, so as I've talked about this, I've actually kind of just assumed that we've been talking about like the GeForce kind of cards, the gaming level cards, which really there's a stigma with the gaming level cards, right? But they're really, I guess the better way to kind of phrase it is it's the consumer level card versus the professional grade card, which is the NVIDIA Quadro cards. The bang for your buck for most activities on the consumer cards is a lot higher. Like you're going to spend $800 for something like a 27 or like a 2080, something like that, an RTX 2080. And that is for most video editing functions, that is going to rock. You get into Resolve, you get into Premiere, After Effects, any of those things, it's going to just crush stuff.
And for
Now,
the exact same
you're-
price, the Quadro card is going to be, you're going to start at like the entry level RTX Quadro card,
Yeah.
like the RTX 4000. That's going to be the same price as your 2080. And the only real benefit for a Quadro card is something that most video editing applications won't pull from. Like, unless you're doing a large number of sequential, or no, not sequential, concurrent transcodes, or you're doing like AI 3D ray tracing, stuff like that, you're not going to see the benefits of a Quadro card over a GTX card in most applications.
They're designed to support 3D simulation, AI video processing when you're getting into, dozens of streams where you're like, the city camera is scanning for somebody's face kind of stuff, like crazy. Yeah, it just gets awesome. But those cards are designed for that. Most people are not doing those things. And spending the money on that doesn't make a huge amount of sense. So there's for the most part the RTX cards, and there's also I'm totally ignoring, mostly because I don't have a lot of firsthand knowledge on them. But AMD has their line of cards as well, and they're very competitive at this point with the NVIDIA cards and should not be discounted. I can't speak to them as much as I would like, so I'm kind of like ignoring them, but I shouldn't be.
We'll save that for another video.
That's a whole other thing. But that they're out there, so definitely give them a look.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. That was a lot of great information. Well, thanks for joining us for this week's Tech Talk. If you haven't already, hit that red subscribe button below. We look forward to seeing you in another week, and stay safe out there. Everyone wash those hands and stay healthy. Thanks, everyone.